Imagine spending your entire career making people laugh. 11 years on television, 30 million viewers every single week, 25 Emmy Awards, a legacy so powerful that Time magazine named your show one of the 100 greatest television programs ever made. Now imagine that somewhere inside all that brilliance, there exists a single piece of footage, just a few minutes long, that you refuse to watch. Not because it was bad, not because you embarrassed yourself, but because it was so painfully, brutally true that even decades later, you cannot bring yourself to sit through it. That is exactly where Carol Burnett stands today. One of the most celebrated entertainers in American history. A woman who turned childhood trauma into comedy gold. Who broke barriers in an industry dominated by men. Who made an entire nation feel joy every single week for over a decade. And yet, there is one episode, filmed in 1977, that she has never watched again, not once in nearly 50 years. The episode aired. Critics praised it. Awards followed. But Carol turned away and never looked back. To understand why, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Because the story of that 1977 episode is really the story of Carol Burnett's entire life. And that life began in pain. Carol Burnett was born on April 26, 1933, in San Antonio, Texas. From the very first years of her life, she understood something that most children never should. That the people who are supposed to love you the most can also be the ones who hurt you the deepest. Her parents were both alcoholics. Her father drifted between jobs, unable to hold anything steady for long. Her mother was emotionally absent, unreachable behind a curtain of alcohol that never seemed to lift. Both of them would eventually die from illness connected to their drinking. Carol was barely a toddler when she began feeling the weight of being unwanted. There were no bedtime stories, no comfort, no stability. What there was instead was silence, unpredictability, and a loneliness that settled into her bones at an age when most children are still learning to walk. But even then, something inside her refused to break. She discovered early that laughter could build a wall around you. That if you could make people smile, they might not see how much you were hurting. That comedy could be armor. When her parents finally gave up entirely on raising her, Carol was taken in by her maternal grandmother, Mabel White. In 1940, the two of them packed up and left Texas behind, heading west to Hollywood. But Hollywood for them was nothing like the movies promised. There was no glamour waiting. They landed in a single cramped room inside a rundown boarding house, surrounded by broken people, addicts, the mentally ill, people surviving on government welfare and fading hope. Carol and her grandmother lived on $20 a week. $20 for food, shelter, and everything else. There was barely enough to eat, let alone enough to dream. But Mabel gave Carol something her parents never had. She gave her unconditional love. She was poor. Yes, their life was hard, absolutely. But for the first time, Carol felt safe. And from that safety, even in the middle of chaos, something creative began to grow. She invented an imaginary twin sister named Karen. Karen was everything Carol felt she was not. Confident, beautiful, always smiling. Carol made Karen so convincing, so detailed and alive, that the other tenants in the boarding house actually believed she existed. She would run upstairs, change her clothes, fix her hair differently, and come back down as Karen. Then minutes later, return as Carol. The fact that grown adults, many of them barely surviving themselves, were taken in by the act of a little girl says something profound. It says that Carol Burnett was already performing, already shaping reality with pure imagination and will. Every Saturday, she and her grandmother would go to the movies. Tickets cost 25 cents for two people, which was more than 10% of everything they had for the week. But they went anyway, because for a few hours inside that darkened theater, life became something else entirely. Stars danced on screen. There was food and beauty and order. The world made sense in a way it never did outside those walls. And when the credits rolled and Carol walked back out into reality of peeling paint and borrowed soap and stolen toilet paper from the theater bathroom, she carried the movies with her like a lantern. One afternoon, she heard a Tarzan yell ring out from the screen, and something clicked inside her. She went home and practiced it obsessively, every pitch, every rhythm, every breath. She had no idea she was training her voice. She thought it was just a game. But that yell would later become one of the most famous moments in her live performances, bringing audiences to their feet in laughter and awe. She was building her instrument without even knowing it. By the time Carol finished high school, her dream was journalism. Her mother had always wanted to be a writer, and Carol carried that unfulfilled wish like a debt she owed. UCLA was a goal, but when the time came to enroll, she was $50 short on tuition. A stranger, someone whose name she never learned and never could, stepped forward and paid it. No explanation, no strings attached. Just a quiet act of belief in someone they barely knew. At UCLA, she enrolled planning to study journalism. Then one theater class changed everything. Standing in front of people, performing, being funny and loud and completely alive. It felt like the truest version of herself she had ever met. She switched majors. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exactly right. By the end of her freshman year, she had been named most promising newcomer in the entire theater program. It was more than an award. It was permission to keep going. A stranger at a party in San Diego would change the course of her life again. Carol was there not to celebrate, but to eat, stuffing hors d'oeuvres into her purse to bring home to her grandmother. A millionaire introduced himself, heard her dream, and offered her $1,000 to get to New York. The only conditions were that she never reveal his name, that she use the money only to pursue her career, and that someday if she made it, she'd pay it forward to someone else. She took the offer. She went to New York. And on June 22nd, 1959, exactly 5 years after receiving that money, she paid back every cent. Broadway came. Television came. The Gary Moore Show turned her into a household name. And then, on September 11th, 1967, the Carol Burnett Show premiered and television was never the same again. For 11 straight seasons, Carol Burnett did something almost impossible. She held 30 million viewers every single week. Not occasionally, not in the good seasons. Every week for 11 years. The show won 25 Primetime Emmy Awards. It inspired Saturday Night Live. It made Carol Burnett one of the first women in history to lead her own variety program in a television landscape almost entirely controlled by men. The secret of the show was something that felt almost accidental: rawness, real laughter, real people struggling to hold themselves together while the cameras rolled. Harvey Korman and Tim Conway became legendary partly because Conway refused to give his best in rehearsals, saving everything for the live taping. You never knew what he was going to do. Neither did the cast. And that unpredictability made the whole thing electric. When Conway launched into his infamous elephant story during a sketch one night, Carol and her co-stars visibly came apart trying not to laugh. Those moments of genuine, uncontrollable human reaction became the soul of the entire show. But the show was never only comedy. And that is where 1977 comes in. Throughout the run of the Carol Burnett Show, there was a recurring segment called The Family. It featured a dysfunctional household that mined dark territory, disappointment, addiction, broken dreams, but always wrapped in enough comedy to let the audience breathe. Carol played a character named Eunice Higgins, a woman suffocating under the weight of a life that had not turned out the way she planned. Eunice was bitter, loud, desperate, painfully recognizable. In 1977, the writers made a decision that changed everything. They would film a version of the family sketch with no jokes, no exaggeration, no physical comedy, no escape valve for the audience. Just pain, played absolutely straight. The sketch was built around a talent show, one of those local television programs where ordinary people believe that one performance might transform their lives. Eunice enters believing this completely. She is going to sing. She is going to finally be seen. She is going to break out of the small, crushing life that has held her down for so long. The audience is going to recognize something in her that the people around her never have. It does not go that way. The judges mock her. Real-life game show host Alan Ludden appeared in the sketch, which blurred the line between fiction and reality even further. Carol played Eunice with nothing held back. No funny accent. No silly walk. No winking at the audience to let them know it was all a bit. She played it as though it was happening to her. As though she was Eunice. As though this was real life, and the camera just happened to be there. By By the time filming ended, the crew was in tears. Not politely emotional, genuinely undone. When the episode aired, viewers sat in stunned silence at their televisions. The camera pulled back slowly on Eunice's tear-streaked face as the lights dimmed. No music swelled. No laugh track offered relief. Just a woman's broken dream laid out completely bare. Critics call it one of the most powerful pieces of television the show had ever produced. Awards followed, and Carol Burnett never watched again. In a 2010 interview, Carol explained it simply. She said it was too real. That Eunice's pain felt like her own pain. That she could not separate the performance from the memory. And when you know Carol Burnett's story, that makes complete sense. She had grown up being laughed at by life itself. She knew what it felt like to want something desperately and be told you were not enough. She had watched her mother dream of writing and drink those dreams away instead. She had lived in a boarding house on $20 a week, watching the gap between what she hoped for and what she had. She had survived on stolen toilet paper and 25-cent movie tickets and the kindness of strangers whose names she never learned. Eunice Higgins standing on that stage, singing her heart out, being mocked by judges while the audience squirmed. That was not a character. That was a mirror. And Carol Burnett had spent her entire career learning how to make people laugh, so that nobody, including herself, would have to stand too long in front of that mirror. She told Harper's Bazaar that she was glad they made the episode. She believed in it. But she also said clearly that it was not what their show was about. Their show existed to help people forget their troubles, not to drag them back into the dark. The sketch had crossed a line, not an artistic line, but a personal one, and Carol honored that by staying away from it. The episode went on to inspire a television movie in 1982 and eventually a spin-off sitcom called Mama's Family. The character of Eunice lived on, but Carol stepped back from that version of herself and closed the door. There is something quietly remarkable about a woman who has spent 70 years making the world laugh, choosing to protect herself from one performance. It is not weakness. It is the opposite. It takes real self-knowledge to understand where your limits are. It takes courage to say, this one I cannot revisit. Carol Burnett has faced things in her life that would have ended most careers and broken most people. A childhood of poverty and abandonment. 2 marriages that fell apart. A daughter lost addiction and then lost to cancer at 38. A granddaughter whose care she took on in her 80s when her own child could not provide it. Through all of it, she kept showing up. She kept performing. She kept making people laugh. But somewhere in a vault, there is a tape of a woman named Eunice standing under stage lights, singing to judges who will not be moved. And Carol Burnett, who has done everything else, will not press play.